Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then, you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I feel like I've been having a lot more connection with my listeners through the Q&As and polls. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Hi everyone, I'm Amber Rose, the religious hippie, and welcome to A Catholic's Perspective. For those of you just finding this podcast, let me tell you a little about myself. I was born and raised a cradle Catholic until I fell away from the church for 8 years. I just recently came back to the church, and I could not be happier with where I am today. I am currently a junior in college, and I'm studying graphic design. I am an ambassador for multiple amazing Catholic Christian companies, and I love working with all of them. Now, some of you may already know me from my popular religious hippie social media channels, such as TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I have all kinds of Catholic content on there, so don't forget to go check those out. So the reason I wanted to start a podcast was so that I'd be able to have a longer format which people could listen to from wherever they are. I particularly wanted to address issues that young Catholics face today in the secular world, and I want to do that by providing information along with commentary and even a little of my own opinion. I can't lie, from time to time I might be discussing very controversial issues, and some will find my opinions unappealing. But I do this out of my faith and service to God. We must keep communicating with each other, respecting each other, and put each other on the path to sainthood. I think you'll enjoy the podcasts coming up, and I thank you for being here with me. Hey everyone, welcome back to my podcast. Today I have my producer Todd here with me. Thanks for being here, Todd. Welcome.
Hi, Amber. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So today we're doing a part 2 to our secular versus Christian entertainment. And what are we focusing on today?
Video games.
Heck yeah.
It's been a while since we've done one of these. I've wanted to do one again for a while because the last one we did was actually one of the highest listened to podcasts that you have out. So let's continue.
Yes. Yeah, I know a lot of people are interested in the Catholic perspective of, the difference between Christian secular entertainment, why Christian movies are so cringy.
We got into, movies and TV in the first one with a tiny bit. We touched on books a tiny bit, but I think we decided we were going to save that as its own episode.
Yes. That was it's a big, broad topic of mine because books have been a huge part of my life since I was younger. So it's one of those that needs its own little podcast. So yeah, today we'll be focusing on video games. I don't have too much experience in video games. It's never been something that's really intrigued me that much, but I do know there is a lot of issues that revolve around video games, especially a lot of immoral things. So it'll be good to touch on that topic.
Certainly. And I am so old that I go back to the beginning of video games when they were actually, much different. There was really nothing ultra violent about Space Invaders or Pong,
Right.
And most of your 22 to 26-year-old listening demographic are going to be like, what are those games? Because they're more familiar with like Xbox games and things like that. So I was there in the beginning of video games. And then I kind of, as I had like my adult life, I'd missed out on that whole Nintendo generation. That was more like my younger brother was in that. And then I kind of got interested in it again when like the Xbox and the PlayStation came out, because they were like cinematic epics. Like the graphics were so good, and the way the games were made was just, you would watch these movie scenes unfold that were kind of unparalleled. And it was really addicting to get back into it. But the amount of violence in video games today is what really bothers me. And also, it's kind of been an age-old thing now for a significant amount of time about whether or not violent movies, violent video games influence youth.
Right.
And there's a lot of theories behind school shootings and things like that, that maybe kids are desensitized
It's
to
accurate.
violence,
But I don't think it's just video games. I think that also feeds into the just in general the content that they're consuming in magazines and video games, but also movies, TV shows, and other things of that nature.
When I was growing up, I was in Boy Scouts, right? So you learned proper handling of things. You learned how to use a knife. When you there was actually a version of the Boy Scouts a long time ago that actually taught you how to fire weapons, how to fire guns. That doesn't exist anymore, but I
Sadly.
grew up with guns. And there was a proper handling of guns, what you needed to do with guns and where you aim them at when you weren't using them, and everything, even when you clean the guns, when you put them back together, when you weren't using them, or how you handle ammunition, like all these things it was really kind of drummed into your brain how to do it safely.
You were really taught respect for the instrument you were using.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And today people are too used to seeing someone in a gangster movie holding their handgun sideways, and it's
I love how I did that as soon as you said that.
yeah, we were thinking
First thing that
exactly the
comes to
same thing.
mind.
So this run and gun mentality is what is programming children today.
Mm-hmm.
I had a chance to go out to the Columbine Memorial in Colorado,
Okay.
which was really interesting to me. There's something about dark tourism that appeals to me. I like to go to these memorials and these different sites and see where these tragic things happen. And
Me
they're
too.
solemn, and they're interesting to see the history behind it, what happened. And those Columbine kids, like, as awful as that was, there's interesting theories behind whether or not video games or movies might have influenced these school shooters, and they still aren't really sure, because those two boys are dead now, and
Right.
we'll never really know. There's just a lot of speculation about it, and that school shooting is now a long time ago, and there's been so many more since then.
Right. I also
And
think with all of that, I mean, just to think about the amount of violence that are in video games, my experience with video games, like I had a DS when I was a kid, like Nintendo DS, throwback.
yeah,
And I basically just played Lego Star Wars and the Lego
yeah,
games. Yeah, they're not violent at all. And the people, like when you kill them, quote unquote, whatever, they basically just break into Lego pieces.
right, right.
It's nothing violent. But when I was in high school, my parents got us a PS4. I never played it ever, unless friends were over. And even then, the repetition quickly bored me. I was never really into it. Like I was just like, oh, this is boring. But I would even play Grand Theft Auto. We didn't own the game, but my other friends had PS stations and we would play it. And I even found that boring. Like, yeah, sure, I liked running things over and I liked crashing helicopters into ice cream stores in the game. But besides that, I would get bored after like 10 minutes and I'd just be like, all right, on to other things. I'd rather go outside. And I think that just shows the difference between maybe like female and male brains, but not just that, but also like the generation that didn't have video games and then the generation that was raised with electronics. It's very contrasting.
I tell you, I think I agree with you in a way with things like Grand Theft Auto, because there's just so much chaos that
Mm-hmm.
you can do in the game that it bores you real quick. It's like, well, there's really no rules here. I can do whatever I want to do in this game. I get tired of it quick, versus a Call of Duty or
Right.
a game like that where I'm in a strategy, and what it
Structured.
does is it puts your brain into a different place where there's not any kind of chaos. There has to be this very organized thing, this teamwork, this structure, but someone gets executed at the end.
Right.
So that's the rub with the game, is that your goal is still to unlock these different things throughout your mission in an effort to kill someone,
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
really the difference. Is
And I
you
know, sorry, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you
no
off.
no
I
good.
know, I came across this story once. I can't remember where the heck I heard it, but I remember that one kid was basically driving extremely recklessly or doing something extremely reckless. And when asked why, he's like, sometimes I can't differentiate between when I'm in a video game and when I'm in real life.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh no, that's not good.
Wow.
And so basically, he thought he was in a video game. And because of that, he felt like he was in YOLO, basically.
Yeah.
He was immortal and he could do whatever he wants until he realized, like, oh, this isn't actually my video game. This is reality. And it's interesting to see how it actually does rewire our brains, video games.
Especially marathon players of games that wind
Oh,
up
yeah.
spending more time in the fantasy world than they do in the real world.
True.
I
Very
think
true.
in today's busy world, it's difficult for parents to screen everything that their children process.
Yeah.
And we've talked about some of this with film and television. I think that's true for music and for books, but
Yeah. I mean,
especially true for video games.
right. I mean, you can't constantly be on every single social media app your child is on at the exact same time as them. You
Yeah.
never know exactly what they're coming across, especially in some of even the most like quote unquote innocent apps. Like Snapchat is supposed to be super innocent, but when you go to the news side of Snapchat, the amount of crap that I see on there, and I don't even click on it, I just screenshot like the titles and stuff and put it on my Twitter. I'm like, and on today's Snapchat story. And it's gross, honestly, the things that they're pushing on kids these days.
Unfortunately, many of the video games in today's market are vulgar and violent and
Mm-hmm.
generally inappropriate for younger children. That doesn't stop the youngest gamers from finding and playing these video games. Like, they're going to
Agreed.
find them. I have an interesting study here that I'm going to tell everyone
Ooh.
about kind of the seductive pull of video games. There's a group called the Harris Interactive Youth and Education Research Group. They did a study. The most recent study they did was in March of 2007. So I'm sure that these numbers are much greater today than what this was, but this was the closest research I could find for this podcast. It says children spend more time at the computer or in front of TV gaming consoles than they spend on any other form of entertainment. These studies estimate that kids between the ages of 8 and 18 are spending up to 2 hours a day playing video games. This can negatively affect their performance in school, their overall health and weight, and lead to aggressive behavior and video game addictions.
Wow.
So that was a 2007 study. So
Imagine how bad it is now.
I imagine that this is greatly enhanced. So there is definitely
just the other day, I was hanging out with one of my girlfriends and we were sitting in her backyard and we were planning out this pilgrimage thing we want to do. And there were these two boys who were jumping off, like there's this pool house in the back kind of behind their gate. And they're just like, I'm gonna jump. And they're like, oh my goodness. And he's like, I'm gonna kick down this door. Like they wanted attention, so to speak. And they're just like, dude, you can't do that in real life. He's like, why not? I did it in video game. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you gotta be kidding me.
Wow.
Like, what?
You're gonna have to change your friends group.
I know. No, but it's just, and then me and my friend were looking at each other. We're just like, are these kids okay? Like, what? What? Do their parents know where they're at and what they're doing? And so that's the other thing, though. I do feel like their parents would have to know that their kids are playing these games. Otherwise, well, most of these kids, at least, if they're under the age of 18, at least, they wouldn't have, unless they have their own money. And so, I don't know. Their parents would have to have some idea of knowing. Either they hear it, happening in the house, or they see it, or they know their kids, being distracted 24/7. Like, there are so many tall tale signs that your kid is addicted to video games that as a parent you can't possibly ignore it, and just be like, oh well, I didn't know. Like, no, you had, like, it's just
So
it's
how do we satisfy gamers without sacrificing family values? I think that's the real question here. What are the
put them in
options for parents?
sports.
Put them in sports. You mean sports video games?
Yeah. Right.
Esports.
Soccer?
Enroll them in esports.
Oh yeah. Yeah, respawn. I don't think that would, no, but I mean, like, if you think about it, most gamers, the whole reason that they're addicted to games, at least this is my opinion, this isn't like, doctor certified or whatever, is because they crave brain stimulation.
Right.
And they get a lot of that brain stimulation, especially the men, that testosterone, because they're fighting the bad guy, quote unquote. And as kids, we would play games like cops and robbers and, cowboys and Indians, which is apparently racist now for some reason, and things like that. And that really satisfied us as kids. But as we got older, you don't play those things when you get older. That's, childhood stuff. And so they want this brain stimulation and this rush of adrenaline that they get during a video game. And adrenaline is technically a drug
Right. Right.
in our brains.
So what's the solution for parents in a God-centered family? What do they do? Are you saying outlaw video games for the kids?
No, I mean, I don't think outlawing video games is like the best thing to do, but age appropriate video games is really important. And putting your 3-year-old on a video game is not smart. In my opinion, kids shouldn't really even have phones and stuff until they're like 13, 14, and they need it for emergencies kind of thing. That's my own opinion. That's what we were raised with. I didn't get my first phone until I was 13, 14. And that was because, again, it was a flip phone and it was for emergency situations.
That was
Apparently
just what, a year or two ago?
I know, right? Only like, oh my goodness, how old am I? Oh, wow. That was a long time ago. God, I'm so old.
Many parents have simply turned off video games in their households. This isn't a bad choice, but many kids are still drawn to that forbidden fruit, and they're going to find their way to get their fix somewhere else.
And I think the important thing is not to even let it into your house in the beginning. I mean, set those boundaries with your kid where it's just like, here's the games that are okay. Like we do have games that are okay. We have like Star Wars game, like Star Wars Battlefront. We have like a Battlefield 2 or something. It's a war game or something based in Vietnam. And then we have like some Lego Star Wars games. We have Minecraft, and I don't know, does Minecraft count as like a Christian like a Christian video game?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, but I don't know. Like there are video games that are okay, like Minecraft and all those that I mentioned. Like there are games, but parents need to really do their research into the games that they're buying their kids. When the kids go, "Oh, mom, I want to play COD or whatever," and the parents just like, "All right, yeah, sure, whatever," and they just go and buy it for them. Like parents need to do their job and actually review what they're going to get for their kid and what their kid's going to be absorbing.
Right.
And it's okay to tell your kid no. You're their parent before you're their friend. And if your kid wants something that's immoral, it is your job as a parent to keep them on that narrow path. And when they become 18, older, whatever, they end up making their own decisions and stuff. You can't stop them from doing that. But as a parent, you need to set those boundaries and be like, these are the games that are allowed in the house and these are the games that are not, And that's not like toxic as a parent. I think nowadays parents think it's toxic to be a parent. Like, no, like you still need to be a parent. And if something's not going to be allowed in the house, make that clear. Be like, hey, this is not allowed in my house. Like cursing is not allowed in our house. This is not allowed in the house. Stuff like that. And just setting up that respect and those boundaries, I think is really important.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There is another solution too, and that is the Christian alternative of video games, which some people don't know exist.
I just Googled it before we hopped on this to see like, are there any Christian video games? And I came across like 3 and they all had like horrible graphics. So what do you got?
That's not all the case though. So let me tell you something. Let me throw some numbers out here for you. So
okay.
Since 1980, there have been over 127 Christian video games. There's been a lot.
Yeah, that's not a lot.
But more than you would think, more than I expected that there would have been since the beginning of video games. And I'm going to get into some of this historically. And I'm not saying necessarily, this is the solution to things. Maybe no games at all are the solution or what. But there are some really good games and really good messages. And at first glance, I think it seems like the video game industry has nothing to offer young Christians, but a few media outlets have heard this frustrated call of parents and gamers alike, and Christian entertainment makers are finally catching on to the video game craze and turning the gore and sex dominated entertainment genre inside out with some new stuff. And these new faith-based games not only uphold the values that Christian parents strive to teach their kids, but also present Bible lessons in a compelling new format. And I think that's what's really interesting here, why I want to touch on it a little bit. The problem is you may not find them in the mainstream gaming outlets that sell Xbox and PS3 games, because they still tend to not want to make these games. So these are going to be games that are going to be mobile friendly games, or games that you play on .com sites, different things like that, because for some reason Sony and Microsoft aren't really interested in catering to this market.
Probably because it doesn't make them as much money.
Exactly.
It's all about the money.
Out there on Google, there's actually several different game review sites that discuss, Christ-centered gamer reviews or family-friendly gaming. So quick Google searches out there for parents will let them find review sites that will talk specifically about games that are good and decent games for your kids to play, that may be, non-violent or non-confrontational type games.
And I always wondered about that, like with Christian video games and things, like how would that work? Like, would you be a prophet and have to do everything the prophet did? Because that could go really, really wrong if it's not programmed correctly. Like, there are so many things I feel like could go wrong with Christian video games.
I'm going to touch on some of that, actually.
Okay.
Some of the types of games. I was going to get into something else first, though, because I thought this was really, I came across this and it said features to look for when choosing video games.
Oh, okay.
So when you're in the video game store with your kids, pay attention to the packaging and the features listed on the box. Some stores have demos available to play, and this will give you an opportunity to kind of review the game before purchasing it. So as any dutiful parent, at least look at the box, look at the description. Don't blindly let your kid use his Microsoft points to download the thing he wants. Like, at least do some due diligence, even if it's quickly. If it's a combat game, look for an arcade-style fighting game instead of a bloody or deadly violent game.
Smart.
So many of these have more of a cartoony type violence, which some parents are willing to accept over very detailed, gory violence.
Like Mario.
True, yeah. And better yet, if you find a cooperative game that someone can play with their friends, or a non-violent games for your friends, generally. So,
Minecraft.
Or for your kids, I should say. And violence isn't the only danger of secular video games. So keep an eye out for game characters in how they dress and the language they use, and try to weed out sexual overtones, four-letter words, rebellious talk. Many of these things are listed in the rating for the video game too. So some parents may not like how video game characters are dressed, how they're portrayed.
I know in Grand Theft Auto, that was one of the big ones, because on the cover, I guess you could see that it's like on the cover of the DVD or whatever, it does have like immodestly dressed people and things, but it's very subtle because it like blends in. It's such a busy cover. It's such a busy graphic kind of cover that like you can't really notice it. You notice all the explosions. And I feel like a lot of times people aren't very observant, so they don't really take time to like look at the covers. They just like take a slight look at it, like, okay, whatever, and then they just buy it. And so that's something I know when I would play it with my friends, the mom would just be like, I didn't think it was like this, and we're just like, well, you bought it for us, so.
So be wary of titles like Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball, because those are going to be typical video gaming characters that are dressed in very explicit bikinis.
Yeah.
And you can imagine all those games. Now, that's an older game. That's a 20-year-old game there, but there's still games that are like these, that took characters out of their normal costumes and put them in almost nothing.
Right.
And, that's just that was another way the video game industry hooked people into buying nearly, essentially, almost pornographic games.
I would call it that. Yeah, for sure.
Another thing for parents is to choose games that are that offer something educational or inspirational. So instead of mindless button mashing, spend time playing other types of games, maybe even card games, things like that.
With, like board games, kind of.
Yeah, board games, card games, all kinds of
board
things.
Games.
And talk and play those with your children and talk to them about the values that they can apply in real life.
One of the best games you can ever play with your kids is Apples to Apples. I love that game.
I don't know it.
It's basically like a kid-friendly version of like Cards Against Humanity.
Okay.
And it's like extremely cute. There's like these adorable little apples, and like it's a card game, and you have to like make the like you have to put in your card that best applies to the card drawn by the other person. Oh my gosh, it's the funniest game ever. It's so clean, it's adorable.
That's funny. One thing is an absolute here, I think, for people to know, and that is that your child will be influenced by the games they play. So we have to keep this in mind. So make sure to choose the games that pull them in a direction where you want them to grow. So if you take anything from this podcast, take that.
Yes,
that
please.
sentence, because that's really the most important thing.
Yeah, because at this point, the kids will be influenced by anything in their life. But if you think about it, the things that they spend the most time in, that's what their personality is going to be shaped after. You know, they spend a lot of time in school. We see a lot of issues in the school system, the brick and mortar system these days. And then they're in a big stressful school system. They go home, they play video games for however many hours. They do homework, they go to bed. Like, there is just this cycle that needs to be cut, because in our generations, because electronics has really taken over, and we see what the brain does when it's exposed to too much electronics. And there's a lot of science out there, stating that the amount of radiation given off even by cell phones is an unhealthy amount. And it's because we have it on us 24/7.
Right.
And there's so many studies out there. And so it's just important to not use technology as a babysitter. And I don't think anyone who's listening to this podcast specifically does that. Like, I don't think they would purposely do anything like that, but it's something to keep in mind, where some parents, when they're cooking dinner, they're just like, oh my gosh, my kid's bugging me. Like, here's your tablet, like, go play. I've seen that way too often in the nannying business. As a nanny, like, I've seen parents do that way too often. And when I would cook dinner with the kids, I would actually show them how to cook dinner. And even if it wasn't perfect, like if they didn't do it the exact way I told them, because I mean, they're 3 and they don't have motor skills,
Right.
it's like, I'm not going to get mad at them. It's a learning experience. And I just feel, as in general, we're using technology for things that it was never meant to be used as. And because of that, a lot of the kids are learning like this aggressive behavior because they don't have an outlet.
Right. For sure. For sure.
Nannying's rough, man. I love the kids, but man, the adults.
For sure. So give them some old 70s video games to play.
I love old 70s video games, like Solitaire and
No, that was after.
Honestly,
that was
actually... you know what my video game was as a kid? The 7 Buckle Stables, Zoo Tycoon, and the Paint app on
funny.
Windows.
That's funny.
What was that, Windows 98 or something?
Windows, well, for you probably, it was probably Windows 98.
We had like this huge box of a computer, and it was hooked up to a tower and stuff, and like a you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Not an actual tower, desktop tower. And we would put DVDs into the tower for our video games, and they'd have to download, and sometimes it took like 3 hours for them to download. And then we would play those games for maybe an hour a day. We would build our own zoo. We would do math games. Like, there were a whole bunch of things, but Paint was our favorite because we could use the spray paint app. We could use the eraser, different colors. We could make things. Oh my gosh. My sister and I would spend hours on the Paint, the Paint app. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We would spend hours on that, just designing things and stuff. Oh, it was great.
Yeah. The Paint app. That's funny. So much of that stuff was around from the very beginning of Windows too, way back in Windows like 3.1.
Right. And it's just like those things where I'm just like, if my kid plays video games, like, those are the ones they're going to play.
In the 70s, Atari was really the first on the scene to be commercially successful, and Pong was like the first game that people recall.
I remember that. Yeah.
Christian video games also started that far back, and they had games that were focused on Bible trivia.
Oh, okay.
That emphasized the importance of knowing scripture. As technology advanced into the 80s and the early 90s, the games became a little more complex. And one of the first big Christian video games was called Bible Adventures.
Oh.
And this game was actually a collection of 3 different mini games, each coming from an Old Testament account. And the gameplay for all 3 of these games was comparable to the Mario games made popular by Nintendo. So in the Noah's Ark chapter, you would try to gather as many of the animals as you can into the ark.
Ah, that makes sense.
And
Okay.
similar adventures would take place in the David and Goliath game and the Baby Moses game.
Okay,
So,
that makes
so
sense.
that's the earliest, the beginning of Christian video games, which I think is really interesting, that there were people that had the foresight enough to want to start to develop these, because they knew that, like any other form of entertainment, film, TV, or books, there needed to be the family friendly audience.
Right.
So it's interesting. A lot of the early Christian video games involved stories from the Old Testament, and the stories of Moses and Noah were especially popular ones. There was a game called Exodus that was very popular, which was available in multiple gaming platforms. One of the most successful games that ever came out for Christian video games.
Right.
Let me see. There was
Wow.
another game called King of Kings and Sunday Fun Day. Um,
No.
yeah, Sunday Fun
No.
Day.
Sunday fun day. Oh, I hate that so much.
Sunday Fun Day is really interesting. I'm going to read you the description of this one.
Okay, tell me.
It's different than most other Christian games because it isn't set in biblical times. Instead, it's a skateboarding game,
What?
which was basically the architecture of a game that was called Menace Beach. So it's a skateboarding game like that.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it's about a kid that is trying to make his way to church. And while there's a certain amount of silliness, when you think about the plot, it's still an interesting idea.
At least
And
he's trying to make it to church.
exactly, that's what he's doing. He has skateboarding adventures while trying to get to church. So that's what Sunday Fun Day is.
I stand that. All right. It's fine. It redeemed itself. Okay.
How funny.
That's crazy. Oh my gosh.
Christian video games in the early 2000s also broadened their horizons and went bigger. So instead of most video games, which had been Bible trivia or mini games, they tried to compete. The Christian market tried to compete on the same level as the secular offerings.
Oh.
And one of the biggest Christian games of all time was the Left Behind Eternal Forces game. So the Left Behind series was already a popular book series, and they were making movies out of it. And you're probably familiar with that, right?
Mm-mm.
Oh,
Nah, it
really?
sounds like it sounds like some kind of like rapture stuff or
Oh, yeah.
something.
Yeah,
Oh, it
for
is.
sure.
Ah.
So the first of the video games, called Eternal Forces, was the first in a series of video games connected with the popular book series.
Okay.
And it was a PC game that combined elements from games like Grand Theft Auto, The Sims, Resident Evil, and it created a spooky post-rapture environment where the
Hmm.
player tries to convert believers and enlist allies in a coming war.
Hmm.
And it isn't a fighting game, though, as it may seem like it would be. The fun of the game is more in world building and creating alliances and converts. So that's really what it was.
Wow.
Another popular theme during this time were games that involved music and dance. So Guitar Hero was popular,
Oh
Dance
yeah,
Dance
I remember
Revolution
that.
was popular. Those were the secular games, and they eventually they received Christian counterparts such as Dance Praise.
Oh no.
Which is a PC game that involves a directional gamepad where the player dances along with the instructions on the screen.
Well, I mean,
Um,
you gotta praise, man.
and Guitar Praise, another computer
What?
game that was, Guitar Praise.
Oh
Uh,
man. I mean, I should give them some credit though. Like at least they're doing something. Like
yeah.
at least they're trying.
And it says that game allowed you to play along with top Christian hits. So
Oh.
that's what
Oh,
that
there you
was.
go.
Yeah.
Mhm. Get your rock star on.
And the future of Christian video games is kind of coming in on like the Pokemon Go craze.
Ah,
And so lately, Christian video games have been more focused on like the mobile side of gaming.
right.
And many of these game apps have simple puzzles and trivia contests that mirror the setup of early 70s and 80s games.
You know what's interesting about Pokemon Go is
Was
like
that?
I feel like it was such like a like a fad thing. Like everyone was into it, and then all of a sudden it just like disappeared. But I remember like so many people in my neighborhood would get like hit by cars and stuff because they weren't watching where
Yeah.
they were going. And then like I was never into it. I never really saw the appeal of like Pokemon, but at the same time I understood like Pokemon and like the big like corporation like it was a big, it's still a big thing. You know, it went from trading cards to Pokemon Go. Like there was a lot of stuff affiliated with it. So I get the idea. I never played it, but like so many kids, high school kids would get hit by cars because they weren't.
Well, I think what ended Pokemon Go is it was a huge craze, and it was a
Right.
new type of technology for mobile gaming that we hadn't seen before, which
Right.
was very interesting. To how they used the camera to work with the game was revolutionary.
Right.
But I think really what was happening was, aside from the safety factor of that, kids getting hit by cars because they're not looking around them, they're looking at their phone, but
Mm-hmm.
also a lot of the main spots where people needed to meet were in popular parts of town where there would be a popular restaurant or a popular bar on the corner. And now you have kids congregating in front of it. And it became,
Wasn't good.
non-conducive to neighborhoods really wanting that going on.
You want to know what I used to do?
What's that?
There used to be an app, and I forget the name of it, but um, it basically, this is what I used to do to train for running. And it was an app in your phone. You put in your earbuds, and it basically mimicked zombie noises. So it sounded like zombies were chasing you. And then you would have to go to certain areas on your map. Like you would have to pull out your phone and look at the map to get resources, like quote unquote resources, like water and like weapons and stuff. And you would have to run to those areas. And then you would have to like, oh my gosh, I
They
was
really
so
they did
fit.
that with the Walking Dead game. It's kind of like the Pokemon Go one. They did that already.
Right,
They
right,
stole your idea.
Did they? Oh, how dare they?
Lawsuit.
Honestly, though, like that was fun though. Like I remember I'm like, oh my gosh, zombies are chasing me. Run, 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 run. And now I'm just like, I would not survive a zombie apocalypse now.
The people that created Pokemon Go were actually the team that got hired to do the Harry Potter game of the same type of game.
Huh?
I know how huge of a Harry Potter fan you are, which is why I'm bringing
Yeah, like
disclaimer. She is
100%.
not a Harry Potter fan. If you're just
Mm-mm.
tuning into this podcast, she does not like Harry Potter or his
I hate
friends.
Harry Potter. I'm sorry, guys. It's not my
But,
thing.
but they wanted to do a similar type of game with Harry Potter where you would, your phone would see things that you could only see in the Harry Potter world, and also your phone could be used as a wand.
I
And
kind of
you
remember
could,
that
you could
actually.
so that, but they never really got it where they wanted it at. So the game wasn't that popular.
Right. I mean, I would still take the zombies over Harry Potter, just saying.
One popular Christian mobile game that's like this is called A Journey Towards Jesus. And in
Oh,
this story, you play a young man who is looking to find Jesus, and along the way, you have to answer questions from the Bible and solve puzzles.
that actually sounds cool, except I'm a woman.
Yeah, exactly, right?
And we don't get to pick our characters?
I guess not, but
Oh.
apparently it's a similar type of thing where you walk around with your phone and you have to go to particular locations, and you know,
Oh,
I guess they school you in biblical history along the way.
I mean, at least it's I mean, at least you have to answer questions and stuff. I feel like that's cool.
But as I said before, there have actually been over 127 games that have been created since 1980, and they've been on pretty much every major platform. So TRS-80 had them, the Texas Instruments had them, the Commodores. When I
Wow.
scan down the list here of stuff, DOS games, Nintendo games, Game Boy, Sega Genesis,
Just
um,
Game Boy.
Windows games, lots of Windows games, Mac games were created. PlayStation 2 was the first Sony device that had any kind of Christian games. Game Boy Advanced had games.
Do you remember those game consoles where you would have to blow on the thing before sticking it in? I
That was
used to
kind of a
play those
myth,
as a
but that
kid.
was the Nintendo. Yeah, that was the early
That was
Nintendo.
okay, because my friend down the street used to have one when we were really small before we even had Nintendo DSs.
Yeah.
And we would have like we would put it in there and then it would like, oh my gosh, it was such a frustrating game.
Yeah.
But we would spend hours trying to figure out how to swing across the crocodile's lair. Like it was
Yeah.
the funnest thing ever.
And the cheat codes were the best thing. You could
Oh
enter
yeah.
in, you could do different little cheat codes for stuff. And what you'd be able to do would be like invincible mode. I would just play everything on invincible mode and just run through the entire game.
Let's go. Da, 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 da. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, I remember those. Those were iconic.
I don't see a Bible game until the Xbox 360 for Microsoft. Everything they did before that was Windows based, but in 2012 they had Bible Trivia Avatar Edition, and that was for the 360. And then I start to see iOS games start to happen in 2014. Bible ABCs for Kids, and that was iOS and Android.
Right.
PlayStation 3 had Adam's Venture. I'm just kind of scanning the list here to see what platforms, but pretty much every platform for video games has had some form of Christian entertainment. PlayStation 4 has Our Church and Halloween RPG series.
Right.
Logos, Logos Bible video game adventure. I see some of the current ones. Jesus and the Matrix. I wonder what that is.
I mean, like, I guess we should give them some credit for like trying at least. I feel like it can be kind of controversial though to create Christian video games because, like I said, if they're not created properly in the right way, it can cause a lot of scandal almost.
Right.
Especially if it's in the context of something like The Sims or like Grand Theft Auto. Like, you can base certain like gaming programs off of the ideas, you know, but like, oh, I'm gonna steal somebody's donkey, like, oh, okay. Like,
right.
You know, but there's certain things where it's just like when you're taking stuff from the Bible, when it has to do with people's religion and stuff, it can be really scandalous sometimes. I mean, you don't see any type of, well, maybe I can't actually speak, but you don't see like Muslim video games or anything like that, really, that I know of, at least, and stuff. So it can be like, it can be sketchy sometimes.
I'm really worried here when I see Bible Gems and Bible Crush.
Oh no! Oh.
I'm a little worried what those might be.
Like Candy Crush, but
it must be.
What? Oh no!
But that's what all I've got for video games. Yeah, I just really wanted to kind of give people a crash course about what was out there for those games, because parents will have a difficult choice if they have a kid who has some interest. Because if your kid isn't out developing his athletic abilities or joining school clubs, he is most likely going to be playing games, reading books, watching TV. Something else is going to pass the time. And I think at the end of this, really, the more information the parents know, the better.
Right. And I also think it comes down to like having a good relationship with your child, like still knowing that like you're the parent and things, but I guess having that respect, you know, and knowing that what your kids do is their own decision, but you still have to be the parent and be like, okay, well, this isn't allowed in my house, like blah, blah, blah. Like, that's really important too, is like to set up those boundaries, because you can't do anything when they become like at a certain age and they actually do start making their own money and doing stuff like that. But you can set them up for success when they're younger and, you know, put them in like extra, you know, curricular activities and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. It can't, sure. I mean, it can't hurt them to get some fresh air. Like, put them in, you know, soccer or start a group with them, you know, and stuff. It's really not that, I mean, I guess I probably shouldn't speak too soon that it's not that difficult, but it's not hard to sign them up for something, you know, right. And they don't even really have to show interest in it right away. I feel like a lot of it, a lot of hobbies that kids, you know, actually end up getting into are ones that they never would have wanted to get into if their parents had not signed them up for it first.
Right.
So, and that's what happened to me. I mean, I was in orchestra for 5 years and I hated like 4 years of it. The last year was pretty cool though. So, it's one of those things where it's just like, just get your kid out there, you know?
Right. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fun one. I hope everyone likes it. When Amber and I get off the podcast, we're going to play a nice game of chess. Oh yeah. You know, cause I can't, can we play checkers? I can't play chess. I never learned. All right. Well, when we jump off this podcast, I'm going to teach Amber how to play chess.
Okay. I accept, but I'm a little slow. So.
Oh my. All right. You want to take us out?
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope you guys learned a lot from this podcast and maybe second, you know, guess or second think some video games you guys want to play, or if you're a parent and you have a kid, maybe go through the video games they play. Just be a little bit more present. If you aren't right now, in their social media life, make sure you're monitoring and, being a great parent as always. And yeah, I will talk to you guys in the next podcast. Bye, guys. Do you have questions or comments about today's episode? Email me at thereligioushippie@gmail.com or leave a voice message at anchor.fm/thereligioushippie. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Selling a little or a lot? Do your thing however you cha-ching with Shopify, the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/offer23.
Thank you for listening to A Catholic's Perspective with Amber Rose, the Religious Hippie. Please be sure and rate and review this podcast. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Be sure to like and follow The Religious Hippie on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, or visit her official website at thereligioushippie.com. This podcast is produced by Todd Fisher and distributed by Metacortex Publishing. And be sure to visit metatomics.org to see our listings of other unique podcasts.